come along and sit yourself down here by my fireside in the Fife Folk Museum. I was just finishing off a wee bit knitting, but you're just in time for a wee story. Now it's a guy called Dreich day out there the day, but I'm lucky because I've got a big roaring fire here to keep me warm. But I mind one time, one Christmas time, when the folk up in the big house, the laird and his family, they weren't so lucky. You see, usually they had a great big fire burning in the kitchen that kept the whole house warm. But somebody had let that fire go out. And it wasn't an easy job to get it going again. Nobody could let it go out. But the cook, she wasn't pleased at all. How could she get the soup on and the kettle on if she didn't have a fire? And the laird himself, he come marching into the kitchen, demanding the king who had let the fire go out. And he had a big old cardigan on to keep himself warm. He wasn't pleased at all. And his wife, well, she was even less pleased. She came marching into the kitchen dressed in her big fur coat to find out what had happened to the fire. And their son, he was more disappointed than angry. Because you see, well, he'd been looking forward to sitting by the fire with his new book and a mug of cocoa. What are we going to do, Feather? He says. We've not got a fire, we're all cold. Well, the laird thought for a minute and said, right, find Jack. So Jack was brought into the kitchen. Now he was a laddie that worked in the big house and he did all sorts of jobs. But this time the laird said, now Jack, I want you to go down into the village and find somebody that'll give us some burning coal and bring it back here so we can get this fire going again. So Jack put his jacket on and he picked up a lantern and he set off down the hill towards the village. Now it was cold out there. He was shivering long before he got to the bottom of the hill. Even the statues at the gates had icicles hanging for their nebs. But soon he came to the first house. And he thought he'd be all right there because, well, it was a blacksmith's house and he was bound to have a big roaring fire in the forge for making his horseshoes. So he chapped it on the door and the blacksmith said, come in, Jack, what can I do for you? And he explained that the laird had ordered them to come down to the village and find somebody that would give them some burning coal to take back up to the big house because their fire had gone out. Oh, of course you can hae some coal, said the blacksmith. Help yourself to as much as you need. And so Jack, well, he filled up his lantern with burning coal. And he was just leaving when the blacksmith says, now, mind Jack, mind and tell the laird who gave you that coal. And I'll be expecting something in return. I'll be expecting to be asked to do all the horseshoeing that he needs in the next year. I'll tell him, said Jack. And so off he went back up the hill, but he'd only gone about 10 paces when he noticed that the fire had gone out. The coals weren't burning anywhere, and all that was left was a wee pile of ash. Well, he couldn't understand it. He thought it must have been the cold that was doing it, so he tipped out the ash and he made his way further into the village. And the next house he came to belonged to the baker. She was bound to have a big fire because she needed to keep her ovens going for baking the bread. So he tapped on her door and she invited him in, and oh, she'd just been making bread and the smell was delicious. But Jack explained what he was after, and she said, oh, of course, Jack, of course, you take some of my coals, take some. And so Jack once again filled up his lantern with burning coal. But just as he was leaving, the baker says, now Jack, mind you tell the laird where you got that coal. Mind and tell him. And I'll be expecting to be asked to supply all the bread to the big house for the next year. Aye, I'll tell him, said Jack. And so he set off back towards the big house, but once again he hadn't gone any more than about 10 paces when the coal stopped burning. It went out, and all that was left was a pile of ashes. Well, he tipped him out onto the snow, and he turned round and he went back into the village. And the next house he camped in belonged to the milkmaid. And he tapped it on her door and explained what he needed, and she said, aye, of course, take some coal. And he took some coal and he put it in his lantern, but as he was leaving, once again she says, now mind you tell the laird where you got that coal. I'll be expecting to be asked to supply all the cream and the butter for the big house for the next year at least. Aye, I'll tell them, says Jack. And off he went back towards the big house, but once again the coal stopped burning. Well, he tipped out the ashes and he went back into the village, and he went round every single house in the village. And they were all quite happy to give him some coal, but they all wanted something in return. Every lump of coal he got stopped burning as soon as he started to walk back towards the big house. Well, he wandered right out of the village to the edge of the wood where the weaver's cottage was. Now the weaver wasn't well off, and there wasn't much reek coming out of his lung, so he obviously didn't hear a big fire, but Jack thought he would tap on the door and ask all the same. Well, when he did, the door was opened by a bonny young lassie, the weaver's daughter. And he asked if her father was in, and she said, no, he's out in the woods chopping wood. But come along anyway, come along and wait. What is it you were wanting? And while you're waiting, would you like a plate of soup? No, you're all right, said Jack. Oh, but you're looking awfully cold. Sit down by the fire and I'll give you a plate of soup. So Jack got his plate of soup and he explained what he'd come for, that he wanted a wee bit coal to take back to the big house so they could get their fire going again. Well, says the lassie, of course you can hae some coal. Tak what you need. My father's bringing some wood, so we'll soon hae a good fire again. Just tak what you need. And so Jack filled again his lantern with some burning coal, and as he was leaving he says, and is there anything you're wanting in return? Oh, of course not, said the lassie, of course not. We're not needing anything in return. We're happy to give you the coal. Here, with your blessing. And so Jack took his lantern with his wee bit coal and he set off back through the village past all the wee piles of ash. And as he walked, he noticed that, well, this bit of coal wasn't going out. This bit of coal was burning brighter and brighter and brighter as he went along, and it was beginning to make him feel quite warm. In fact, by the time he got back to the big house, he was fair sweating. Well, he took the coal into the kitchen and they put it in the fire and they put some kindling round about it, and soon they had a blazing fire once more. And they sat round that fire, the laird and his wife and their son and the cook and Jack telled them the story I've just told you, of how he came to get the bit of coal. And the laird, he scratched his head, and the cook scratched her head, and the laird's wife scratched her head, and they wondered how come the bit of coal he got from the weaver's cottage kept burning when all the other bits of coal went out. But the laird's son, he worked it out, and Jack, he worked it out too. Maybe you've worked it out. You see, although Obedy was willing to give them some coal, Obedy wanted something in return. Obedy, that is, except the weaver's daughter. She'd given the coal with her blessing, freely. And so that was why that bit of coal kept burning. And that's the end of my wee story. An old tale called The Day the Fire Went Out. I hope you have a nice cosy fire to sit beside. And I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a good New Year for all the folk at the Fife Folk Museum.